I think many of us have had that sometimes especially probably when we were young, that you just wanted to see God. I still remember as a young boy that when my father was praying at the table, I was trying, because I was thinking, well, how can I worship God? I was trying to picture God on his throne, and I thought that would help me when I would be praying. Actually, it didn't. Why? Well, that picture, that idea of God in my mind was far too small. But do you recognize that desire? I just want to see God. You know, God gave us eyes, and when we see something, we know we are close, right? And when we see something, we can feel closer as well as a result. Wouldn't it be great if we just could see God? Wouldn't it make worship so much easier? Wouldn't many more people start fearing him and worshiping him and adoring him? I don't think so. Last week in Isaiah 40, we looked at several of pictures that describe God, and I try to remind ourselves of it also as we prayed and worshiped together in prayer together. Those pictures. And I said, these are only pictures. Because our God is so much more great, far greater than any picture can describe. He doesn't have a body like us. He is what we call a pure spirit. And he doesn't have boundaries like us. Our bodies have boundaries. His doesn't. He is in his spirit, so he's infinite. He's limitless. And therefore also we cannot see God because he is, first of all, far beyond us. And yet, when we listen to our text this morning and we hear the prayer of Moses, he prays, Lord, show me thy glory. How is that possible? God did show Moses his glory. And last 2 weeks we've heard, behold your God. In other words, look at him. How does that work? God is invisible. We cannot see him with our bare eye. And yet, we are called to look at him. And Moses prays, may I see thy glory. How does that work? How can you and I see God, who is invisible? And that's what we are going to consider this morning as we consider our series, as we listen these 2 coming weeks to Exodus 33 and Exodus 34 in a row. First, we are going to consider the prayer of Moses. Lord, show me thy glory. And then next week, we are hoping to see, and we pray that we may see it truly with our hearts, the glory of God, as God shows himself to Moses. So our text this morning is Exodus 33, verse 18. And Moses said, I beseech thee, show me, I pray thee, I implore thee, I really want it. Show me thy glory. So our theme is, show me thy glory, a grace-filled prayer. And we are going to ask 3 questions. First, can I see God? 2, can I know his presence? And 3rd, can I experience his glory? But before we go to our text, I need to say something, because when we try to see just one attribute, one characteristic of God, God is glorious. He's merciful, compassionate, gracious, infinite, all those words. This morning we are going to think about he is invisible. When we try to to think about God with just one attribute. And we go to a passage and we cannot but meet more of God than just that one attribute. And that's going to be our experience, Lord willing, also in the weeks ahead, that when we focus on one thing about God, we get more of Him. And I pray that would be glorious to us, and that He would teach us to see His greatness indeed through all that. So let's go to this first question. Can I see God? That's basically the question that the people of Israel were asking. And they came to Aaron, and they had heard of the law, and they were terrified by the law when they heard it. Thunder and lightning and the glory of God. And they said, no, let us not listen to the law, because we would be consumed. Well, they were impressed at that time. But then Moses went up to the mountain, and he was on the top of the mountain, and it lasted, and it lasted, and it lasted. And people came to Aaron and said, up, Moses, up. We don't know what happened with this man, Moses. We can't see him anymore. Make some gods for us that we can see. Can I see God? I want to see God. Moses represented God, and now we don't see Him. Aaron tragically didn't push back. He knew he had heard the law too. Don't make idols. He said, well, maybe, I think he might have thought like maybe if I just ask them for their money, for gold and silver, make a big sacrifice for this, then they will think twice. But they didn't. He made a golden calf for them, right? And he said, these are your gods, O Israel, that have brought you out of Egypt. And tomorrow is going to be a feast for the Lord your God, he said. Now Moses was invisible, but they wanted to see something. They were asking this question, can I see God? Can I have a God just like the nations around, just what we were used to in Egypt? And we know what happened, don't we? God said, Moses, you need to go down right now. Down from the top of the mountain where he was, enjoying the presence of God. And God said to Moses, they have corrupted themselves. That's what we do by nature. We make gods out of things that are no gods. When then Moses comes down, children, remember, he's carrying those two tables of stone God had written with his own fingers. This is how I want you to live. He comes at the foot of the mountain, and he throws them down. They shatter. He's basically saying here, this is what you've been doing. You've been breaking the law. You're a covenant breaker. Why? They wanted something that they could see. They wanted to dance around this golden calf that they could see. And in that moment, they broke 3 of God's commandments at least. No other gods. First, don't make an idol. Second, don't blaspheme God. Don't use God's name for something that He's absolutely not. And that's what they did. They made this calf. And Aaron basically said to them, yeah, you go ahead. You can see God. But in this way, the consequences were disastrous. Do you remember Moses came down and 3,000 people were killed because of their idolatry? 3,000? All these graves there. And then Moses needs to go up and down and intercede and plead and say, Lord, please have mercy. Have mercy upon the people. They have grievously sinned against thee. But did you also notice when we read the chapter together that something else was happening, something very visible? That tent of meeting that probably stood right in the center of the people, Moses just takes the stakes and he takes it, carries it all the way outside of the camp. God, who was in the center, is now outside. A visible lesson. God is, as we're saying, okay, if you want to serve idols, if you want to serve me your own way, well, go ahead. But you can't have two things, either me or idols. So if you want, go ahead, but I will be distant. Can I see God? There he goes, withdraws himself. Not closer, no, absolutely not. Distant. They wanted something visible. They wanted something that you can manipulate, right? That's what we all want by nature. We want something that listens to us. If we want a God, then God needs to listen to us and not we to him. Right? They wanted to worship something. They wanted to, the Lord, okay. But regardless of who he is and what he says in his word, this is how you please me. And God says, oh, if you want that, okay, but then I go. My glory is not in your midst. My glory is not in your life. And that shocked the people, actually. It shocked the people. And they repented. They mourned. Outwardly, they put all their things that they had, ornaments, I think it's jewelry or something. They put it away and they showed that they were humbled. But actually, God was still distant. You know, something similar can happen today when we are not worshiping God according to his word. We have no idea how great and glorious and majestic and holy and just and righteous he is. But we just want a God that does exactly what we want, that is as small as our desires. A God that we can tell what to do. Gives us what we want. Are you happy then? I have to tell you, if that's what you want, then you will experience that God is not near. He's far away. Because there's only one true and living God, and he is worthy that we would serve him with our whole heart in the way that he wants us to serve him. But what a contrast in this chapter. That's what the people wanted. And then the contrast with Moses can almost not be sharper. Moses is at that very moment very close to God. He was on the mountain, he came down, and then he pitched the tent outside. And there again, he knew the closeness of the Lord. Even the people could see it. They were watching him. They were staring after him. And then they saw the pillar of cloud come down in that tent. It was not a tabernacle yet. It was a tent, just a tent, where he would meet with God. They saw the glory of God come down. And verse 9 tells us that Moses talked with God. He talked with, very special. God would come near. The Lord would come close to him. Verse 11 says it this way, and the Lord spoke unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. But maybe you say, well, God is invisible, right? How can you be face to face with God? Verse 20, we read it, no one shall see God and live. Notice what it says. He spoke to God face to face. There was a speaking. And that voice, through that voice, and through the speaking of God, he knew God was close. He didn't see God. He enjoyed his presence, yes. So there was this intimate conversation going on with God. How do you speak with friends? How do you speak with friends? If you're a good friend, you tell your secrets, right? You tell that those kind of things that you say, well, I'm not going to tell anybody else. I will tell you. I trust you. And you come to your friend, what do you think about this? You don't hold back. That's how Moses talked with God. And God with Moses. Think about it. That glorious God we heard about last week. The God of the universe. Speaking to you. That's how close God was to Moses. Deuteronomy 34 verse 10 tells us that not any prophet after that had quite the experience like that. We are thinking about this question, can I see God? But really, if we listen to this chapter, we need to rephrase that question and say, how and why do I want to see God? How do I want to see God? Do you want to see God just like Israel, regardless of who he is, a God that is kind of manageable, does exactly what you want and that kind of thing? Do you want that? A God of your own making? A God regardless of what God says in his word? Or do you, like Moses, really, you want to know and honor and worship and adore God and live in accordance with his word and with his commandments? A God who can be as close as you are with your friends, closer even, more intimate. Why? Why is that possible? Well, listen to the Lord Jesus years later. He says to his disciples, I don't call you servants. A servant doesn't know what his master does. He just follows commandments. I call you friends. And then later on he says, if you love me, then keep my commandments. That shows that you love me. That shows that you love me. Can you see God? What is the answer? Absolutely, yes. You can see Him. Through Christ, New Testament believers have a relationship as intimate as Moses had. A relationship in which you speak with God as your friend. And He is as real to you as if you would see Him. You see Him with your heart and by faith. You trust in Jesus Christ. Now the question, do you have such an intimate relationship with God? Maybe I should, do you want such an intimate relationship with God? Have you seen God when you talk to Him in prayer? Have you walked with Him throughout your days, daily life? You talk to Him as you go, and you walk with Him, and you hear His voice when you open the Word, or He reminds you of a text. Do you experience the presence of the Lord? Moses did. When we eavesdrop into this prayer, the people didn't experience God's presence close. And that brings us to our second thought here. Second question, can I know His presence? You would say, Moses, what would you pray for? I mean, you're happy. You've got the Lord there. You should be satisfied, right? And yet, as we listen into this prayer that begins at verse 12, we hear an intimate conversation going on between Moses and the Lord. And Moses is concerned that because of the sins of the people, the Lord is no longer going to be close. He knew God is holy. How did he become aware of that? Well, God said it very plainly. I'm not going before you. I'm not going with the people. And He calls, whereas He called the people always my people, now He says the people in verse 1. Distance, right? Distance. And He secondly also had promised in Exodus 23, my angel, my special angel, my name is in him, my presence, the angel of my presence will go before you. He will conquer your enemies. He will bring you into the promised land. That angel would go and bring them all the way. And that's why Moses could do what he was doing as a leader. But when we read this chapter, Moses is no longer certain of it, because in verse 2 it says unangels. First, in chapter 32, verse 34, there it says my angels still, but then God says, I'm not going with you, with the people. And then it says unangels. So Moses is confused. It's vague. Is God going with me? Is the angel going with me? Yes or no? By the way, this was a very special angel. God had said also about this angel, you need to obey him. If you don't obey him, he will not pardon your sins and transgressions. Why was this such a special angel? Well, Exodus 23, verse 21 says to us, for my name is in him. The name of God is who he is. So this angel is God. Is God. It's the angel of the Lord. The angel of God's presence, he's called it at other places. The angel of my face, my presence. The angel of the covenant, Malachi 3:1. This is an angel that represented God himself. This angel would lead them into the promised land. Now, after this sin with the golden calf, Moses is concerned, and we hear that concern in verse 12, don't we? See, look, you say unto me, bring up this people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast found favor or grace in my sight. Moses is basically saying, well, I'm thankful I have found grace. I know the presence of the Lord. I know I'm called to bring this people to the land of Canaan, but I can do it. I must know that the Lord is going with me, that the presence of God is coming with me as a leader. That's the first thing he's concerned about. So his prayer is asking basically this: please, Lord, as a leader, may I know thy presence. How else can I lead these people to the promised land? I need thy presence every hour. That's the second question. Can I know the God's presence? Parents, do you understand that? If you have to lead your family, fathers, mothers, or maybe business owners, you have to lead your business. Do you understand that? I need the presence of the Lord in everything I do. Is that your prayer? Can I please know the presence of the Lord? Whatever I do. But he doesn't only want that for himself, no. He wants more than that. He wants it also for the people, God's people. Listen to verse 13. Now, therefore, I pray thee, I ask thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. He's asking two things. Lord, I want to know thy way intimately. And perhaps he's asking, Lord, show us the way to the promised land. I don't know the way. But lead us. May I know it. And secondly, then he says for the people, consider that this people is thy people. This nation is thy people. He's pleading. Lord, you've said it. It's your people. He's pleading. It's not my people. It's your people. Take notice of that, Lord, please. What's God's answer? Verse 14. My presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. You would say, well, wonderful, right? That's all you need, Moses. Stop praying. There's an answer right there. Isn't that your desire, Moses? My presence, literally my face, will go with you. Isn't that what you were praying for? The angel of God's presence going before? Your prayer is answered, and I will give thee rest. What else do you want? You're going to experience something, Moses, of what later Jesus would say, come unto me, all ye that are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest. Wonderful, Moses. Just sit down, relax. But Moses keeps on praying. Why? He was listening for a different answer. God says to Moses, my presence will go with thee, and I will give thee rest. That's masculine singular in the Hebrew. So one person. I will go with you, Moses, not with all the people. And so Moses says that my prayer is not answered yet. God has not spoken a word about his people. Not a word. There's complete radio silence. And Moses picks up on it. Well, then let us not go from here, then, he says. It's as if you hear the desperation in his voice. When we listen to verse 15 and 16, if thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence. Carry us not up from here. Don't let us go anywhere else. And then he explains it. For wherein shall it be known here that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? How do I know that I and the people have found grace in thy sight? Lord, you've said it constantly. You have found grace in my sight. But I want I and the people. Is it not in that thou goest with us? So shall we be separated, distinguished, be different, I and thy people, from all the people that are upon the face of the earth. Moses saying, well, let us stay here at Sinai, at Mount Horeb, just here, not a step further to the promised land. We need God's presence for all of us. How would you pray? How would you pray? Would you pray like Moses when you know a loved one is not saved yet? Or do you say, well, wonderful, I have been saved. Great. All this matters is me. You see, when the grace of God works in us, that's not how we think. When the grace of God works in us, we are like Moses. We want everyone to fear the Lord, everyone to love the Lord, everyone to have a relationship with God. And so that's why we hear Moses plead and pray on. And Moses is saying, I want to know the presence of the Lord for me and the people. And so he persists. And have you noticed? This is actually a very grace-filled prayer. It's amazing. 5 times you see the words grace, or you could say favor, in these verses. Verse 12, thou hast also found grace in my sight, the Lord says to Moses. Moses echoes that in verse 13. If I have found grace in thy sight, verse 13 again, that I may find grace in thy sight. And here in verse 16, how can I now, see, no longer about himself, how can I know for sure that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? This is a wonderful word. That's such a wonderful word. Grace. You see, Moses realized God is gracious. That's one of his attributes, one of his characteristics. That's who he is. God is gracious. Moses knew that. He knew the favor of the Lord. He knew the grace of God in his life. And Moses knew this people needs grace. Their sins have provoked God to anger. They have served idols. They are absolutely unworthy of God's presence any moment. They wanted to blend in with the rest of the world. They didn't have any merits to plead on their behalf. And so, what does Moses pray for? There's nothing that we can pray. There's nothing that you and I can make ourselves acceptable to God. This is a glorious word. Do you realize it? Do you realize it? Glorious word. Grace. Moses is pleading it. If ever we want to experience the presence of God with us, we need grace. And Moses is saying, please, Lord, give me grace. May I and the people see thy goodness and grace and great glory. And may we find rest for our souls. What a lesson here this morning. This is the lesson. If ever any one of you, we want to be close to the Lord, we cannot do without grace. If we want to know the presence of God, if we ask the question this morning, can I experience the presence of the Lord? Can I know it? Yes, only by grace. What is grace? God's absolute, undeserved favor upon me because of Jesus Christ. It's free grace. You can't pay for it. You can only receive it by faith. Personally, as a family, as a church. Moses is saying, Lord, I don't want to go a step further without that presence. Not a step further in my life. Moses is saying more than that. When he pleads for the presence of the Lord, he's actually pleading for the presence of Jesus. Because that's really who the angel of the Lord is. Here's Jesus in the Old Testament. That's Jesus. Before he became a baby, became into our world, he was the angel of the Lord. He's like God. He's the same characteristic. His name, God's name is in the angel. You can translate the angel of the Lord as the angel who is the Lord. So Moses is saying, not a step further without Jesus. Is that what you're saying too today? Not a step further without Jesus. As a church, as families, personally. Don't let us coast. Don't let us wonder if the Lord's presence is among us, yes or no. Not a step further without Jesus. The grace of Jesus, undeserved. Or would you be okay if our church would just be a church like nothing different than a social club or some kind of charity? We do good things and we say good things to each other. We say, well, at least we have the gospel from Sundays to Sunday. And, we love to hear the gospel and we try to be the best church in the area. Or do you say, not a step further without the presence of Jesus? Presence of the Lord with us. His gracious, His special presence, so that we know God is among us. Not a step further to the promised land. Not a step further to our journey to either hell or heaven. You see, there's something else here why Moses prays this. He explains it, right? He says, I want to know that the people of God is actually a special people, that God makes a distinction, that God makes us different from all the people in this world. Can people see that? In our lives? Those are different. These people, they're from whole HRC. They're different. You see, what happened here in this history is that God's presence had withdrawn and God threatened to disown his people, Israel, and because of idols. And so they were not different than the people around them. And they had no voice in the culture. They had no voice in the lives of sinners that are still unsaved. Still the same today. That's why we ought to pray this prayer. Lord, not a step further without thy presence, without Jesus, without grace. What was God's answer? Verse 17. I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken. For thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. I do it because of you, Moses, because of your pleading. You have found grace in my sight. I will do this thing. I will come along. I will go with this people. I will go before you and the people. I will be present. My angel of my presence will go with you. Dear congregation, this is scandalous grace, someone said. And it is. People who are unworthy, who worship idols, who love the things of this world, who are no different than the rest of this world. God says, I'm going with you. I'm going with you. This is scandalous grace. They had just disobeyed him. And God says, still, I'm going with you. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. You know, the Lord still does that. Also today, if you ask, can I know the presence of God? Yes, because there's one who prays. His name is greater Moses. His name is greater than Moses. He is the angel of the Lord. He is Jesus. He prays for his people. He prays until him and his people find grace in the eyes of the Lord, his Father. And he suffered for it, and he died for it, and he bled for it. And he says, I will go with you. God says, I will go with you because of Jesus. I will build my church. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. Why? Because the Father says to the Son, you are my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. I love you. You have found grace in my sight. And because Jesus has found grace in the sight of his Father, therefore a sinful people can be accepted in the beloved, in Jesus Christ. And find grace in the eyes of the Lord. And experience the promise of his presence, and experience that he will guide you all the way to the promised land, all the way to heaven. Scandalous grace, amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Oh, don't you think Moses must be happy? He must be saying, well, that's it. Let's stop praying. No. Yes, the Lord had said, my presence shall go before thee, and I will give thee rest. And I will go with you and the people, Moses, and I will do that thing that you have been praying for. Moses, why don't you stop praying now? What else do you want? Well, let's look at that lastly in our last question. Can I experience his glory? Moses is not yet satisfied. He wants more. He needs more. He prayed for himself as a leader. He prayed for the people. God answered. And now he says, I want more for myself, for my personal life with God. Verse 18. And he said, our text, I beseech thee, I pray, I implore thee, I beg thee, show me thy glory. Lord, I want to see you. Your glory, your majesty, your splendor, your greatness, your goodness, your mercy, your kindness, all of it. Show me your glory. This word means heaviness. You know, the idols, when idols are mentioned in the Old Testament, often the word that is used is lightness, vanity, nothingness. Here's the contrast. Show me your glory, your weightiness, your heaviness, your beauty. I don't know how to say it. The presence of God, His glory, the outshining of who He is, the brightness of God shining into our hearts and into our lives, the beauty and the glory of all who He is, all His attributes. Lord, show me thy glory. Show me who you really are, yourself. But isn't that impossible, Moses? Verse 20. You cannot see my face. For there shall no man see my face and live, God says. If God would really show Himself to us as He is, in His perfections, in all His glory, you and I would be killed by the glory and the weightiness and the beauty and the power and the magnificence and the majesty of God. Killed on the spot. And yet, Moses wanted to receive more of God. More. Wouldn't you say, well, Moses, don't you have enough yet? Look, what you all go through. Burning bush, 70 elders, you saw God and you were not consumed. Mountaintop experience on Sinai and in the tent of meeting, and you've seen all His glory in the miracles. Haven't you enough, Moses? Don't you have enough? No. If you know God and if you have tasted something of His beauty and glory and you have seen that the Lord is gracious and you have seen Him in the face of Jesus Christ and you've tasted of His glory and His goodness, you always want more. More, Lord. More. You see, that's the sign of life in your life. If you know that shows that you know the Lord. Lord, show me thy glory. I want more. Do you recognize that in your life? This is a mark of a true Christian who is close to the Lord. If you're backsliding, if you're living in sin and you're not close to the Lord, then this is not your prayer. But if you're living close to the Lord, John Piper put it this way, if you're not living close to the Lord, well, if you're living close to the Lord, this is your desire. If you're not living close to the Lord, then this is how John Piper put it. If we don't feel strong desires for the manifestation of the glory of God, so I want to see God, it's not because you have drank deeply and are satisfied. What then? It's because you have nibbled at the table of the world so long, your soul is stuffed with small things, tiny things. There's no room for the great. Do you see it? Just like these people. If you say, well, this is not my prayer, then I urge you, turn away from those things that don't satisfy, all those small, tiny little trinkets that you're playing with and that you are making your God. Idolatry, we call it. Confess the kind of sin and pray earnestly, Lord, show me thy glory. Because if you see something of the glory of God, you are just cured. You don't want those little things anymore in life. You want to surrender all to Jesus. Years later, when the Savior was about to suffer, there was this puzzled disciple. He had heard Jesus talk about suffering and about going away, and not coming back later. And Philip said this, Lord, show us the Father. And it's enough. It sufficeth us. That's all I need. Show us the Father. Do you hear the echo? Moses says, show me thy glory. Show me the glory of the Father. Now, what was Jesus' answer to Philip? He that has seen me has seen the Father. Don't you believe, Philip, that I'm in the Father and the Father is in me? He that believes in me, the works that I do, he shall do also. And greater works than these, because I go to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, I will do it. Do you believe it, Philip? If you love me, keep my commandments. He that has my commandments and keeps them, it is that loves me, and he that loves me shall be loved by my Father. If you see the glory of Jesus, you will experience the love of Jesus. You will experience the love of the Father. You will see the glory of God. And then Jesus said to Philip, and I will love him and will manifest, show myself to him. That's the answer to the question of Moses, show me thy glory. That's the answer, show me thy Father, show me the Father. I will love him and manifest, show myself to him. My glory. Do you see it? Believe in me. Learn to keep my commandments in the power of the Spirit. I will love you. I will show myself to you. My glory. And whatever you ask in my name, I will do it. So what is the answer to that question? Can I experience his glory? Absolutely yes. Yes, there is a promise. For all those who turn away from their sins and turn to Jesus and trust him and learn to walk in his commandments, it is a resounding yes. Can I experience his glory? So as we go home, I want to ask you this question. Will you pray this? Will you pray this? For us as a church, for your family, for all of us personally, Lord, show us thy glory. Will you come to church next week as we continue our series on this with this prayer in your heart? Lord, show us thy glory. Maybe you should say, me first. Yeah, you may. Or do you say this morning, well, let me be filled with trinkets. Let me just eat my stomach full with things that don't matter. What will it be? Lord, show me thy glory.